Aye, kuwe kuwa madue.
Aye, kuwe amadue.
Aye, kuwe kuwa madue.
Aye, kuwe amadue.
Could you please introduce yourself?
Arnold Xavier Cornelius Perkins, and I come from a tradition where your godparents give you names. So Arnold is after my father, and so is Perkins. Xavier is one godparent, and Cornelius is another godparent. So I'm the son of Arnold and Jesse Perkins.
Excellent. Well, we're so happy to have you today. And we just want to ask you some questions about your life and your history. This is the Oral History Project.
Sure.
Yep. I'm curious what you would say would be like maybe the top 3 things that you feel have been most harmful, I guess, to our community that you've seen.
Most harmful.
Most harmful.
I think the lack of education. Education is really freedom. I mean, the more you understand about how things operate, the freer you are. I mean, and so I think education is one of the things. I think the self-hate in terms of violence we commit on each other is really harmful, because it's hard for me to shoot Spencer, but it's easy for me to shoot that nigga, because I depersonalize who you are. And I just make you be something else, you know. And so I think violence within our community is one of the major harmful things. I think the lack of economic viability, not being able to meet your basic needs, whether it's food, whether it's health care, excuse me. I think that those are some of the harmful things, you know, within our community. And I hate the self-hate that we often have toward each other. I mean, the notion that niggas ain't shit. I just think, well, first of all, I don't know any niggas. That's just the first thing. Let me riff on that for a minute.
Go ahead, please.
So I think about roots, and I think about the one section that the white guy has this brother whipping Kunta Kinte, and he said, "What's your name?" "My name is Kunta Kinte." Beat him. "What's your name?" "My name is Kunta Kinte." Beat him. "My name is Kunta." Beat him. "Your name," and he kept saying, "Your name is Toby. Your name is Toby." And so he said, "No, Kunta Kinte." And so they beat him. He was all beat up, and he said, "What's your name?" And he said, "My name is Toby." So we call each other nigger, and we make it acceptable. And so we call ourselves desensitizing the word. To me, when you say nigger, that means something to me, because that's where I grew up in the South. People call you nigger. And that was a fighting word. And now we use it like it's nothing. You know, white people call us niggers, and that's cool. I mean, and so I just have a difficult time with us calling these, ourselves. And so we'll say, "A nigga ain't shit." You know, so I'm gonna smoke him. I'm gonna blow him away. So anyway, I just think that language can be harmful within our community, because language have power. Words have power. Words have meaning. You know, like the word minority. I'm not a minority. I've never been a minority, never will be a minority, but we accept it. White supremacists, white people are not supreme. But there's these things just roll off of our tongues as if it's nothing, but we don't think about the words we use. So words are can be weaponized, or they can be loving.
Yeah. That certainly makes sense, and I'm sure you've also noted that too, and just in your journeys with spirituality and understanding the power of word. You know, regardless of what maybe religious practice that that you follow. So that certainly tracks and makes sense in the same way. because that also feeds into self-hate that you're talking about.
And, you know, and speaking about the religious part, I think that the institution of the church is so powerful if used correctly. So instead of beating people up, beating people over the head about you're going to hell and all that, why don't you talk to them about let's start a food co-op. Let's start a giving circle. You know, let's start a business. You know, but instead we spend time in our institutions talking about you going to hell. If you don't do so and so, you're going to hell. And I just think there are missed opportunities, and we have very few theologians and a lot of preachers. We've got a lot of preachers, but I call them Bible thumpers. And I just think there are missed opportunities that we could deal with some of the harm within our community. If we were to have a conversation, what would happen if I know there's a church down the street here? What would happen if that church decided that for our Sunday service, I want everyone to come ready to sweep or paint. You go and you sweep this 4 blocks around your church. You come back and talk about the experience. As opposed to coming there, taking up an offering, talking about how sinful you are and so and so and so. And so I think we have institutions that are, this is pejorative, but I'm saying anyway, that are misguided. That could be more helpful to deal with the harms that we have than they are. And also it would begin having us not be afraid of our children. We're afraid of our children now. You know, we're afraid. I'm going to just riff a little bit more. So. I don't be going to jail right now, Brother Cole. You got me. Yeah.
Yeah, not even.
I wonder if the alarm goes on automatically.
Hey, that's the first time we've heard it.
Oh.
Yeah.
So
please continue.
So we have institutional things that teach our kids wrong behavior. I give you examples. So I got a call about pepper spray and restraints on our kids at a juvenile hall. And I told the person, I said, first of all, it's a human right issue. That if I were to pepper spray or to hold my kid in restraints, I would be arrested. Yet and still, you legally break the law by having adults hold kids, pepper spray them, hold them in restraints. Now, people say, well, these kids are wild. I've worked with young people just about my whole life, and they are wild. So what happens if I have you locked down in the facility and I have all the other people go to their rooms and I just let you wild out, you know, until you, because you're doing what you're doing, there's something going on inside of you. But the way I deal with it as an institution is I spray you or I hold you down, but I tell you not to do that in the community, because that's the behavior you've already learned in the community. If I'm on the block and I hang out, I'm going to intimidate somebody, you know, because I'm going to take your lunch, I'm going to take your money, I'm going to take your dope, whatever it is. Yeah. Because you're weak, you're a chump. And so we reinforce that by locking down our young people and then pepper spraying them. But yet and still, we as a community, we don't say nothing about it. Well, that kid, you got to handle them some way. How come other counties handle youngsters and they don't spray them, they don't, restrain them like that? And we do, and it's primarily Black or African youngsters and Latino youngsters. You know, it's just it's things like that that the institutions are we give the institutions permissions to abuse us, and we don't say anything about it. But I know that was a sad truth. That's been on my heart.
No, that's good. You've had these experiences throughout the country, living in Midwest, growing up there, moving to the East Coast, and then finally moving to the West Coast. And you've got to see society in a bunch of different ways. And I'm curious, what are some lessons you've learned about Black society as you've grown and been in all these different areas?
You know, I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is weird to say, but we're human beings, period. Like, Blackness is a part of us, but it's not the defining feature of us. Like this idea that I had growing up around what Black people do, what they don't do, who we are, who we aren't, it's totally been blown out for me. Like, we are everything. We do everything. We live everywhere. We have all these experiences that you can't just put into a box because we're humans, right? Like, we have every experience that humans can have. There's nothing off limits to Black people. And so for me, that's one of the biggest lessons I learned, the diversity of who we are as a people. Definitely, I know our similarities and our cultural connections, but I got that growing up. I felt that growing up. What I didn't feel growing up was the differences, you know. They were there, clearly. They were there. Like, if I just tapped into them, like in my own family, it's very diverse. You know, we have lots of different people who have lots of different interests and passions and ideas and experiences. But going around to these different places and interacting with different community really let me see, like, nah, Black people have experiences in all things human. So that's one of the big things I feel like I learned.
No, it's interesting. And just having these experiences, what do you feel like are, on the flip side, what are some of the most harmful or biggest issues that are within our communities?
I mean, you know, the legacy of enslavement, you know, like the ongoing effects that we still feel today, definitely right up there for me. You know, I would call that out along with the myth of white supremacy, because on the on the other side of the coin to the myth of white supremacy is the myth of Black inferiority, right? And that is eating us alive in our community, right? Like, just even philosophically, right? Like, we're not able to, as a community, break from ideas that are generated by Europeans, that were generated for Europeans, you know? And these thought patterns and these ideas are very much embedded in American society, in our education, in every institution in this country. So this is very problematic because it makes it hard for us to see who we are and what really matters to us philosophically and what are our systems and our modes of thinking. So I think for me, that's one of the biggest challenges. And to get more material and concrete, I also believe that capitalism is one of the biggest challenges to our people. Specifically because that's a system designed based on extraction and exploitation. Yeah. And us, the land and the indigenous people of America, or the so-called Americas, are the test case. You know, we're what this system is built on. And so for me, as we're trying to seek liberation and put ourselves in a better economic situation, if we're not grappling with capitalism, then we're just, to me, reduplicating the same system, just taking advantage of each other instead. And then I will also say what I would call the ecological crisis, or what some people might say climate change, is a very big issue for Black people. Whether it's explicitly known or said, in my opinion, this is something that is detrimental to us. And I think there's been a lot of examples of it. To me, Hurricane Katrina remains the most stark example to me, for our people to understand, like, this climate change issue, this ecological crisis, is gonna hit us first and worst, like most, if not all things in America. So for me, that's what I feel like some of our biggest challenges.
Well, No, I mean, you touched on a lot of interesting points, and especially when you mentioned capitalism, just one of the tenets around that involves there being a hierarchy in regards to, who gets the most resources, who has them available, who's able to manufacture or, extract. And that, that always means that someone has to be on the bottom for that. And when you tie that in with all the racial aspects and history that's been in the U.S., it's almost always going to have that impact, as you say, first and worse with black folks, as we've been seeing. So around that, what would you say are maybe some ways you think these issues can be fixed?
Through decades, maybe even centuries of intergenerational organizing. I do believe that part of our challenge in organizing and movement building is to get back to an intergenerational model of organizing. I grew up and started my organizing on college campuses when I was like 18, and I'm almost 39 now. And in that time, I really do feel that I've seen organizing become this thing about working with the people who get it instead of working with the people who experience the problems. And there's this disconnect that I feel like we believe we can read books and we can read theories, and if we know these theories, then that makes us better organizers, or that makes us more radical. And I just don't believe that. I don't believe that we need to be organizing with just the folks who get it. Oh, you understand prison industrial complex, so let's make up a program, let's organize. No, we all have to understand that we have lived experiences that shape our wisdom about how to make change. And I do think that there's a disconnect between our generations. Like, we have segregation in our movement work. Like, you have older people who do these kind of things, you have younger people who do these kind of things. But what we need is a movement that is family-based and intergenerational, that we can pass on the victories from the older generation to the younger generation to the next generation on purpose, not by accident. So that's part of why I really like the work that we're doing at the Brotherhood of Elders Network. I've never been in an organizing space with elders until I came to the Brotherhood of Elders Network. Sitting down, talking with older people who were in the Black Power movement, who were in the Civil Rights movement, and now we're here in our new movement, and we are learning from them, they're learning from us, and then we're pulling in younger brothers too, to help give them the wisdom that we have for their next movement. And I think that just makes everything stronger.
Yeah, no. Just moving from that, I'm curious, just from these experiences you've had, what would you say are some lessons that you've learned about society or Black society?
I've never accomplished anything of significance without help. Although, I grew up in the American way of, rugged individualism and all that crap. The truth is that you're not going to get anywhere without help. Finding it can be an issue for you. Accepting it can even be a bigger issue. I have trouble with that one. What else? Go back to the question again.
Sure. What are some lessons you've learned about Black society and just, as you've been through all these different experiences?
Never give up, never quit. Live life for your people, and you'll never die. That sounds kind of, I don't know, might sound kind of weird, but that's the way I see it. I was thinking about this morning, that it's the analogy, the story that Native Americans are attributed to, Native Americans, about having two wolves inside of us. And the question is, which wolf do you feed? Well, as I said earlier, I have rage, and then I have love. And the thing that happened when my son was born, my first son, was that I stopped feeding that first wolf, which was rage and anger. legitimate rage and anger. These folks were trying to kill us out here.
Yeah.
And I started feeding that wolf that loved and wanted to nurture. And education fell into that. Because that's, even I became a counselor. You know, I got a master's in counseling. And I was a community college counselor, but I still focused on, this is an educational process. This is not a shrinking process. I'm not going to talk a hole in anybody's head. I'm going to help people learn to manage their own journey. Black folks are beautiful, resilient, persistent, determined. They focus on that. Not not on what white folks are doing to us, although they're doing a lot. That is not the key that opens the door. It's like even with the Brotherhood of Elders, I understand about the politics of Oakland or America, or California and all of that, but that's not where I focus my energy. My energy is about how do we build a network of brothers. That's what I found in Mississippi with SNCC. It was a network of brothers and sisters. And that's what I found here. And every place I've stopped along the way, I've tried to build those networks, whether it was here in West Africa. I did not mention that I spent 2.5 years in Senegal and Gambia in the late 60s and
Wow.
Early 70s.
Were you teaching, or what were you doing out there?
Oh, I didn't have no degree. No, I was escaping America.
Oh, okay.
And I thought that if I got out of here, the madness would disappear. Wasn't true. Brought the madness with me. But I met a lot of good brothers. In fact, my oldest son is named for my best friend, who is Senegalese, Omar, Job. I didn't know a lot. I hadn't studied our history. I'm living in Dakar with a family. I didn't know anything about Gorée Island, which is right off the coast. I mean, within a canoe, you know, a boat ride. I didn't know that there was a slave castle there, any of that stuff. Now, one of the people who lived there, who were Senegalese, they knew it was there, but they didn't talk about it, which is one of the themes of being in Africa. But I was adopted into a family that extended from Gambia, which was English speaking, to Dakar, which was French speaking, and I moved back and forth between them. I was pretty poor, but I had a ticket home. That was a requirement to get a visa. But in the end, somebody asked me the other night, why did you come home? This is where my blood is. I mean, there's something about culture. It's like the water. And you may be, in fact, I met at the Senegalese Ballet general rehearsal. Omar and I were hanging out with the cast, or the dancers, and being an American in 1969 or 70, I was sort of like a celebrity, you know. I mean, hey, people want to speak English, want to know what's going on, you know, and all that stuff. But after that after the laughing and joking, a brother walked up to us and said, I'm such and such, and I'm from Cleveland. Now, he was deeply immersed. He looked like any other African there, and he was a dancer or a drummer or whatever he was. And he'd been there about 8 years, but he was still not Senegalese. He could speak French and he could speak Wolof, but he wasn't Senegalese, and he was preparing to go home. Because although he hated what was happening in Cleveland, it was still his home.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I experienced, that it's time, you know. You're not going to find peace here.
I get that. You gotta, essentially sounds like you've been searching for that, or, you know, even to escape it and go to other places and, you know, having those experiences.
Yeah, I guess maybe that's one way of looking at it, at least that part of my life.
Or maybe some was the piece was when you started having children, finding some of that maybe?
Yeah, children settled me down, gave me a reason. I was still pretty crazy. I've been pretty crazy most of my life, but you know, it's relative, I guess.
Like that.
Go ahead.
Okay. What would you say are maybe the top 3 things or that you would think are the most harmful that you've seen happen to the black community or in the black community?
You know, Stokely Carmichael once said that, and I got to know him when I was in the South and actually here in San Francisco. He said the worst thing that white folks did to us was not to enslave us, although they did. The worst thing they did was teach us to hate ourselves. And I've subscribed to that. So what do we have to do? We have to love ourselves. I mean, that was the switch that happened in my life, that forget the anger, get with the love.
Yeah.
So love yourself as an individual, which can be a struggle. Love your family, love your community. And you start to dig deep into black folks' history and culture. It is a beautiful thing, for me anyway. It's just, we're an extraordinary people. Now, yes, we are living in a slave society, and many of us are really being subjected to that on a daily basis in these prisons and in these exploitive jobs. I mean, you drive through Oakland, see all the homelessness and all of that, and you're like,
Yeah.
the wealthiest country in the world. It's just, you can't ignore that. But I still think the thing that harms us most is we don't love ourselves as much as we could or should.
I get that. And what do you think?
Oh,
go ahead.
lack of education.
Lack of education.
I don't know. Not taking advantage of the education. But it's a reason why, you know, they start getting rid of affirmative action in these schools. We were turning out folks who could lead. And now we still turn them out in black colleges, but education is a linchpin, in my opinion. It's certainly attributed to why I get to sit here. And all that reading I did in the middle school and early high school, my mother's a pharmacist. She's passed away in 2017. My grandfather was a school principal. Those were the foundation pieces that allowed me to navigate America.
Wow. And, you know, just around that, I think you started to speak to this. What are some ways that you feel like we can fix these issues, especially around loving ourselves? Like you mentioned, having so much hate for each other, not understanding that. What do you think are some ways we can fix some of these issues?
It's just the reverse of what I said, which is reach deep, find love, find something that you would do for free if you could afford to, and find a way to get paid for it exceptionally well. The most precious thing we have is life. It's this breath. You know, the first thing I sometimes ask students, what's the first thing a child has to do or baby has to do when they're born? And they say cry, they say this, that. To me, it's take a breath. And what's the last thing you give back when you leave here? Breath. So the great blessing for me is that I woke up this morning and had the gift of breath. Now, what am I going to do with that? Is the question for me. And so, that's the answer. Go to school, learn every way you can, read, love, fight. Just find a way. I had to identify the tools that I needed to use. Some people have become doctors. You're a journalist. His brother's a videographer. These are all tools to the liberation of our people. And so mine was education. It's still education. That's why we're doing this storytelling.
That's right. is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
Let's see. In terms of future things, I think we all, as Black people around the world, I feel like we should get ready to have resources and to manage those resources. We've been in a place of scarcity for a very long time, and we still will be, but I do believe that we're moving into a different era where we're gonna have control of resources. And how we use those resources is gonna determine the course of humanity. And I really mean that. Not just Black people. We're the only group of people that can speak to the human experience from start to finish. All people on this planet come from people who were in Africa. The human experience is an African experience fundamentally, more so than it's been anybody else's experience. Human beings have lived on the continent of Africa for at least 500,000 years. There's no other place in the world like that. And so the work that we do is really fundamentally about our species. And what we choose to do with the resources that we're going to get and going to take is going to determine the future of our species.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Really appreciate all your words of wisdom, and yeah, this has been excellent, man. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. It's been great talking to you.